I cheated on my husband. And when he found out, I didn't beg him to stay. I handed him a legal document that said, "Take it all. Just don't leave me." This isn't just a story about betrayal, it's about the silent aftermath. And the desperate act that might have destroyed us more than the affair itself. The weight of the moment was unbearable. My heart ached as I stood there, knowing that everything I had built, my marriage, my family, was crumbling before my eyes. I had betrayed my husband, Jim, in the worst possible way. I had cheated on him, and though I had spent years building what I believed to be a strong, loving marriage, it was all shattered in an instant. The pain I felt wasn't just about the affair, it was the guilt, the shame of having broken the trust of the one person who had always been there for me. How could I ever expect him to look at me the same again? How could I ask him to forgive me? I had always thought of myself as a faithful wife. Jim and I had been together for over a decade. We had built a life, a home, and 2 beautiful children together. Our marriage, by all accounts, was strong. We laughed, we loved, we supported each other. I never once questioned our relationship until, in a moment of weakness, I made the mistake that would haunt me forever. It wasn't that I wasn't happy. I loved Jim deeply. He was everything I had ever wanted in a partner. Our 2 boys, ages 9 and 11, were a constant reminder of the life we had built together. Jim was kind, attentive, and everything I could have hoped for in a husband. He satisfied me emotionally, mentally, and physically. So how did I end up here? How did I fall into the arms of someone else? The answer wasn't as simple as a desire for something I didn't have. It wasn't about Jim lacking in any way, he didn't. It was more about me. It was about a part of myself I didn't even fully understand. The attraction I felt toward Steve, the neighbor, had nothing to do with Jim or the love we shared. It was a misplaced desire for something new, something exciting, something that felt forbidden. I convinced myself it would never hurt anyone, it would just be a temporary escape. But it wasn't just an escape, it was a mistake. A mistake that cost me everything. Steve and I had an affair that lasted for 5 months. It wasn't even that long in the grand scheme of things, but it felt like an eternity in the worst possible way. I wasn't proud of what I had done, but I kept telling myself that it was a mistake I could fix. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Once trust was broken, it didn't just heal on its own. Once you betrayed someone, that scar would never completely fade. When Jim found out, everything changed. There were no more quiet evenings, no more shared smiles over dinner, no more comforting moments before bed. Instead, there were silences, cold glances, and the heavy weight of betrayal hanging over everything. Jim stopped looking at me the way he used to. He didn't want to hold me, didn't want to talk to me. I could feel the distance growing with each passing day, and with it, a deep sense of regret filled my chest. But how do you repair something that's broken? How do you get back the love and trust you've shattered? I couldn't just sit back and let everything slip away. I had to do something. Anything. I had to fix this. In a moment of desperation, I thought a postnuptial agreement might be my answer. I knew it was a bold move, and I knew it might not work, but I had to try. This agreement would give Jim everything he wanted, every ounce of control. It would offer him the security of knowing that he would not lose anything, except for me, of course. If he stayed with me, he would keep everything. All I could offer him was my promise to be faithful, to do whatever it took to rebuild what I had destroyed. But would it be enough? And still, I couldn't help but wonder, could a marriage survive after such a betrayal? Was it even possible to repair the damage I had caused, or was this just the beginning of a long, painful unraveling of everything we had once shared? The weight of the uncertainty loomed over me. Would Jim ever see me as his partner again? Or would we simply become strangers living under the same roof, coexisting for the sake of our children? As I stared at the piece of paper, I thought back to the day I first met Jim, back when I thought I had everything figured out. Was I truly ready to face the consequences of my actions, knowing that some things can never be undone? The answer, though, was not clear yet. It wasn't just about the affair anymore, it was about how to live with the consequences and whether Jim would ever be willing to let go of the past. The next steps were unclear, but one thing was certain: the road to redemption would not be an easy one. It all started with an innocent glance. The kind of glance that lingers just a second too long, but you convince yourself it's nothing. Steve was new to the neighborhood. Tall, with a disarming smile and an easygoing way about him, he quickly became a fixture at the community gatherings. I wasn't immediately drawn to him. No, I was happily married to Jim, a man I had built a life with, someone who understood me in ways no one else did. But there was something about Steve that gnawed me. Something untamed. It wasn't love at first sight, at least not in the traditional sense. But the attraction, God, it was like a spark. It was that magnetic pull, something I hadn't felt in years. I was married, in a fulfilling relationship, and yet, there was this part of me that craved the excitement, the unpredictability of something forbidden. I thought it would be harmless, just harmless flirtation. I could manage it, keep it controlled. Or so I told myself. At first, there were the small exchanges, conversations at the mailbox, accidental brushes of the hands as we passed each other. Those fleeting moments of connection that felt so insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But then one evening, I found myself walking across the yard to his house after an impromptu chat about nothing. It wasn't planned. It wasn't intentional. But there we were, alone, on his porch. And when he looked at me in that way, intense, unreadable, like he could see through every layer I had carefully constructed, I couldn't breathe. The first kiss caught me completely off guard. It was raw, unexpected, like a primal reaction that had been building up without my notice. I pulled away instantly, guilt flooding my chest. What was I doing? I was married. But Steve didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned in, and before I knew it, I was caught in a whirlwind of passion I had never imagined would sweep me off my feet. And just like that, the line I had drawn in my head between right and wrong, between love and betrayal, blurred. That kiss opened a door I could never shut again. The affair didn't begin with grand declarations of love. It wasn't about emotional connection or deep affection, it was about excitement. It was about something my marriage, which had become comfortable, was no longer giving me. The secrecy, the thrill of getting away with something, it was intoxicating. Every moment with Steve felt like living on the edge, something so utterly forbidden that I couldn't stop myself. The hours spent in his presence were exhilarating, but they also filled me with dread. How could I explain this to Jim? How could I continue with this lie, knowing the man I loved was in the dark? I tried to justify it, convince myself it wasn't really hurting anyone. Jim was still my husband, and I still loved him. We had 2 beautiful children. So why was I doing this? It didn't make sense. I thought that if I kept it secret, if I didn't let it affect my family, it wouldn't be so bad. I was wrong. The guilt twisted in my stomach every time I kissed Steve, every time I pulled away from Jim and saw the love he had for me, untainted by my betrayal. I was ruining the one thing I had always treasured. 5 months passed, 5 months of hiding, lying, and living 2 lives. The thrill didn't last. It couldn't. Reality has a way of making things fall apart, no matter how much you try to hold them together. The secrecy became heavier. The lies piled up. I had to sneak around, make excuses, fabricate stories just to cover my tracks. I started distancing myself from Jim, emotionally and physically. It was easier to do that than face the truth. How could I look him in the eye when every glance felt like a reminder of my betrayal? But it was the lies I told myself that were the hardest to bear. I thought I could handle this, that I could manage it, but I couldn't. And then, one night, it all came crashing down. I don't know what I expected to happen, but I never imagined it would end like this. The moment I saw Jim standing in the doorway, his eyes wide with disbelief and hurt, I knew it was over. There was no coming back from this. He knew. He had found out. And I had no excuses left. The affair that had once felt so thrilling, so forbidden, now felt like a death sentence to everything I held dear. The weight of my choices crushed me, and there was no turning back. I wasn't just afraid of losing Jim, I was terrified of losing myself. How had I let this happen? How had I thrown away everything for a fleeting moment of excitement? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it wasn't just about Steve. It was about me, about a part of me that had been craving something I didn't even understand. The affair wasn't just about lust or infatuation, it was about a deeper emptiness inside me that I didn't know how to fill. As I sat there, facing the wreckage of my life, I couldn't help but wonder how I had gotten here. The affair had begun innocently, yet in the blink of an eye, it had escalated into something that threatened to destroy everything. Could I ever fix this? Could Jim ever forgive me? Was it even possible to rebuild a marriage after this kind of betrayal? The truth was, I didn't know. I didn't have the answers. I only knew that the affair, despite all the thrills it had promised, had changed everything. What started as an innocent spark had grown into a fire I couldn't control. Now, I was left to pick up the pieces and try to find a way forward. But one thing was clear, nothing would ever be the same. And that realization hit harder than any consequence I had yet to face. As the days went by, the realization of what I had lost settled in. The excitement, the thrill, was gone, replaced by a deep sense of regret. I couldn't take it back. And what hurt more than the affair itself was the hurt I had caused Jim, the one person I had promised to love and honor. Would he ever trust me again? Would he ever look at me the same way? Or had I completely destroyed something that could never be rebuilt? The road ahead was uncertain, but there was one thing I knew for sure, the affair was just the beginning of the pain. Now, I had to face the consequences, and they would be far more devastating than I ever imagined. When Jim found out about the affair, it was as though the ground beneath me had vanished. The shock of seeing him stand there, frozen in disbelief, his eyes hollow with hurt, hit me harder than I could have ever anticipated. The man I had loved for so long, the man who had stood by me through every trial, was now a stranger. His reaction was not anger, not outrage, but a coldness that seeped through every glance and every word that followed. He didn't yell or scream, though I would have preferred that. Instead, he withdrew, shutting me out in a way that seemed to sever the very connection we once shared. It was as if my betrayal had shattered not just the trust between us, but the very foundation of who we were to each other. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling of distance between us. It wasn't just his coldness, it was the silence that had taken over our home. Jim stopped responding to my attempts at conversation. He didn't yell at me, he didn't even look at me the same way anymore. Every word that escaped his lips felt rehearsed, mechanical. The warmth that had once filled our interactions was gone, replaced by a chilling detachment. It was as if, with one mistake, I had erased the years of love and partnership we had built together. I knew this wasn't just about what I had done, it was about everything that had led to this moment, and everything that would come after it. At first, I tried to make things right. I begged for forgiveness, I apologized over and over again. But each time I saw his face, so distant and unreadable, I realized my words were not enough. I wasn't sure what Jim wanted from me anymore. He didn't want my apologies, didn't want my promises. He needed time, and time was something I didn't think we had. I had broken the one thing that mattered most to him, his trust. The emotional devastation wasn't confined to just Jim either. My children felt the weight of this betrayal in ways I hadn't anticipated. They weren't old enough to understand all the details, but they were old enough to sense the tension in the air. They knew their father wasn't the same, and they could see that I wasn't either. The house that had once been full of laughter now felt like a tomb, each moment tainted by the knowledge of what had happened. My boys, who looked so much like their father, who shared his easygoing nature, no longer seemed to feel the comfort of home. Their joy, once so easy and unrestrained, was replaced by awkward silences at dinner, and looks of confusion when they saw their father withdraw even further into himself. I couldn't help but wonder, how would they remember this time in their lives? Would they grow up resenting me? Would they ever forgive me for the hurt I had caused? It wasn't just my immediate family who felt the effects. The ripple effect of my actions spread outward, creating alienation in our social circle as well. Our friends, who had once been so supportive of our relationship, now avoided eye contact or made awkward small talk. The whispers started to build, and the pitying looks were harder to ignore. People in the neighborhood no longer invited us over for barbecues or casual gatherings, as if my mistake had tainted everything I had once been a part of. I had betrayed Jim, but in many ways, I had betrayed the entire image of the woman I had been, someone who could be trusted, someone who was above reproach. And the consequences were not just personal, they were social. The isolation I felt was suffocating. But in the midst of all this emotional chaos, something unexpected happened. Jim proposed a postnuptial agreement. The idea was as practical as it was desperate. It wasn't a proposal of love or hope, it was a proposal of survival. It was Jim's way of holding on, of trying to find a way forward in a marriage that was, at least on the surface, broken beyond repair. The terms were harsh, even brutal. In essence, the agreement was designed to protect him while still leaving a door slightly ajar for me to redeem myself. If I stayed, if I accepted the terms, I would forfeit nearly everything I had once considered mine, including a future with Jim, unless I proved beyond doubt that I could regain his trust. There was a chilling reality in that contract. I wasn't just asking for a second chance, I was bargaining for one. In many ways, the postnuptial agreement was my last-ditch effort to fix what I had ruined. It wasn't the romantic gesture I had once imagined, no grand declarations of love, no promises of eternal devotion. It was a businesslike arrangement, a cold calculation of what Jim felt he needed to protect himself from further pain. And, to be honest, I didn't blame him. He was doing what he felt was necessary to safeguard his heart. After all, I had broken it. The emotional distance between Jim and me grew even more pronounced after the agreement. We went through the motions of daily life, caring for the kids, attending to household duties, but there was no warmth, no connection. We became mere cohabitants, trapped in a house that no longer felt like a home. There were no more affectionate touches, no more shared looks of understanding. The bond that once existed between us had been replaced by something cold, something functional. Even when we were in the same room, we might as well have been miles apart. I kept hoping that things would change. I clung to the faintest hope that Jim would see beyond my betrayal, that he would find it in himself to forgive me, to let go of the bitterness and the anger that had overtaken him. But with each passing day, it felt more and more like a dream I would never wake from. The fracture in our relationship was no longer just a crack, it was a deep chasm that neither of us seemed able to cross. As I sat there, reflecting on everything that had led to this point, I couldn't help but wonder, was it worth it? The affair, the lies, the broken trust, was it all worth it for a fleeting moment of excitement? I had destroyed something beautiful, something irreplaceable, and now I had to live with the consequences. The damage had been done, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't undo it. What was left for us now? What was left for me? Could I ever be the woman Jim once knew and loved, or had I forever changed the course of our lives? The truth was, I didn't know. But I knew that this was only the beginning of the fallout. And the journey ahead would be long, painful, and filled with more uncertainty than I had ever faced before. In the wake of the affair, my thoughts circled endlessly, and I realized that there was only one way to begin to repair the wreckage I had caused, a postnuptial agreement. The idea wasn't born from any sense of romanticism but rather a cold, practical need. I knew Jim was slipping away from me, emotionally, physically, and mentally. His indifference had become so palpable that even the simplest gestures, like holding hands or making eye contact, felt like a distant memory. He wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I had expected. He was numb. And in that numbness, I saw the end of us, unless I could offer something, anything, to prove that I still cared. I was desperate. The thought of the postnuptial agreement hit me like a lightning bolt, though it seemed out of place. It wasn't what I imagined would save us, but I knew I had no other choice. I reached out to an attorney, unsure where to even start. The lawyer was professional, her face unreadable as we sat across from each other. She asked me about the specifics I wanted, and I found myself trembling at the thought of what I was about to propose. The terms of the agreement would be humiliating to me, but I was willing to make the ultimate sacrifice in hopes of redeeming myself. It wasn't just about the legal jargon, it was about Jim's sense of security. The postnuptial agreement would give him control over everything, and the terms were decidedly skewed in his favor. I would agree to allow him to keep all the marital assets, including the house and savings. He would also have the right to see other women, to live his life however he chose. The only stipulation from my side was that I would remain in the marriage, but the terms were clear. I had to prove myself worthy of his trust again, with no guarantees that it would work. I was offering him control, and in return, I asked for his forgiveness. Was it fair? No, but it was all I had left. With the document drafted and ready, I sat on it for days, wondering if I was about to make a terrible mistake. Could I really do this? Could I really hand over so much of myself and let him see me so vulnerable? But the truth was, I was already vulnerable. My actions had proven that. The agreement wasn't a way to control the situation, it was a final attempt to show Jim that I would do anything, to rebuild our broken marriage. It was a chance for me to take responsibility, to lay myself bare and see if he could find it in himself to forgive me. When I presented it to him, Jim's reaction was a mix of surprise and wariness. He read through the terms with a furrowed brow, his eyes scanning the document as if trying to decipher something more than just the words on the page. I watched him closely, holding my breath as he processed what I had proposed. For a moment, he didn't say anything, and the silence was deafening. I wanted to reach out, to grab his hand, but I stayed still, giving him the space he needed to decide. After what felt like an eternity, Jim looked up at me, his eyes hard and unreadable. "You're serious," he said, his voice steady, though the hurt lingered there. I nodded, my heart sinking further. What else could I say? This was the only thing left I could offer. He hesitated for a long moment, then signed the agreement.